Hello. Today let's look at planning for improved treatment. And here we're looking at fecal sludge and septage. Fecal sludge comes from the pit latrine, and then septage comes from the septic tanks. So let's dive into the 8 step planning loop. Here we start with assessment. Then next you have consensus with the communities. The other is to do with the service area. Then you have the location and loading. Here you have assessment of technology, selection of design, and then the detailed design. Remember, this is an iterative process. So one has to go back and forth and refine at every stage until you arrive at the detailed design. So let's look at step 1 and 2, which is assessment and consensus. And here you look at identifying actual problems. Try as much as possible to avoid assumptions because they may affect your output in the end. That's why this process has to be iterative, where you keep checking, tweaking until you get to what is desired or recommended. And this has to be supported with or by data, which can be collected by either satellite imaging, or you can look at census reports for population, and also benchmarking from other service providers. Here looking at the utilities that are available to give you demand estimates and specific pain points from the community. And then lastly, you arrive at consensus. You must justify the need to treat this fecal sludge and septage being received from the community. So now that drives us to the next, which is visualizing this waste. Once you've done your assessment and then arrived at a consensus, you need to visualize and give an idea. So the visualization here, we're referring to using the sheet flow diagram, which gives you an idea of what is safely managed and what is leaking through the community as unsafe. So this covers the entire sanitation value chain and starts with containment. Here you have the user interface first of all, then you have the containment, emptying and transport, and then you have the treatment, which ends with resource recovery or disposal. So the illustration you see there is that of a fecal sludge of a sheet flow diagram. And in this case, this city, which is the demo here, you have 54% is safely managed, while 46% is unsafe. So if you're a public health expert, that gives you the reason to see where to focus the most. And here you have the different sources of this waste. That now drives us to the next step, which is defining the service area. And here you're looking at planning. And planning depends on two core issues. One is looking at the settlement patterns. How distributed are these settlements? Are they clustered? And remember, settlement is quite challenging in areas with informal settlements. You find congestion may limit availability of space for some of these projects. So defining the service area is also important. So the other is to do with administrative boundaries. In most cases, you look at the city, municipality, town councils, and then the local councils. Each has got its limitations in terms of jurisdiction. Therefore, you need to understand who is responsible for operations where and at what level during the planning phase. And here, this will now give you ideas on whether to invest into a centralized system or a decentralized system. With a centralized system, the advantage is economics of scale. You centrally manage all this waste in one place. Whereas the advantage with decentralized is that you cut on the transport costs in terms of distance, because you have these fragmented treatment units, and also it's easier to find for small units compared to when you have a large need. So here we're now looking at selecting the perfect location. So here you look at the distance between the town where people are settling and the treatment plant. So that distance recommended here is between 500 meters to a kilometer. Some of the reasons include issues to do with smell, and then also noise, and then these are some of the reasons that you need to consider when citing a perfect location for a fecal sludge or wastewater treatment plant. So there are other factors to consider which are on this scroll. One of them is you need good road access. Vehicles must be able to access the point, the cesspool tracks, for ease of movement. The other is to do with suitable topography. Here you look at opportunities to maximize gravity so that you avoid raising the need for energy in your treatment process. The other is avoiding floodplains. Floodplains, if you construct in a floodplain, you risk having your system compromised when there are floods. And this is one of the worst case scenarios that can happen for a fecal sludge treatment plant. All this would end up into the community, risking exposure to pathogens, which is not a good thing. Now, next, look at the load assessment. Here, we are looking at how much goes into the fecal sludge treatment plant. So how do we estimate this volume? The first thing has got to do with tanker activity. But remember, accurate loading actually is very important to avoid plant failures. And that's why we talk about the hydraulic loading in terms of volumes, how much is received. So the first thing is to do with tanker activity. Here you're looking at delivery records for the tankers or cesspool tracks. Cesspool tracks. So secondly, you're looking at if you have survey data, you've done your field visits, then you may have the number of pits in your community, the tanks, and also the tank sizes. This can also give you an idea of how much you expect from the community in terms of volume. The other is to do with the population. Here, population equivalents give you an estimated quantity that is generated in terms of fecal waste, which gives you an idea of actually what to expect from this community. Let's now look at the organic load assessment. What you see there is the organic load assessment formula, which is, first of all, denoted as shown there, where you have the value you get in kilograms per day as biochemical oxygen demand loading, which is BOD, and then the Q, which denotes flow, which is in cubic meters per day, and then that capital LI, which gives you the effluent concentration got from your lab results, from the analysis of the sewage before it enters the fecal sludge treatment plant. And that gives you an idea of how much you're receiving to the treatment plant. And this very formula you see, you can switch the BOD with COD or TSS to also compute the values for those. COD here we're referring to chemical oxygen demand. TSS we're looking at the total suspended solids. Now let's go into understanding the issues with the variation. Remember, fecal sludge does not come in consistent volumes. There are variations. So here, while assessing the loading, that's when now the issues to do with the peak factor comes in handy. So the peak factor helps you account for intermittent deliveries. And this is a multiplier that helps you calculate the flows from the average values here you're looking at per month, per day, and per hour. So these averages give you an idea of what to expect or what to consider regarding the volumes anticipated at the fecal treatment plant. Now let's look at issues to do with technology selection. Here we have combined 6 and 7, assessment of the technology and selection of design. Now with this, there are two core questions that most planners ask. The first one is, how well does this solve the problem? So the technology that you're suggesting, how well will it solve the problem? If it's a fecal sludge treatment plant, do you go for one that is mechanized? Do you go for one that uses the sun, like the drying beds? Or you think you would opt for something that quickens the drying? So these are some of the things that you need to think about as a planner. The other is, how might this fail? So for every technology, there are those shortfalls. But then you need to look at how sustainable, how well you will be prepared to manage this. So this is very important. Besides that, then you need to also look at some of the constraints. And this could be to do with land requirements, the needs for power, energy in your system. Then how well are the staff or those available? Do they have the sufficient skills to run this treatment system? And then the others go to do with the capital and operational expenses. Do you have that sufficient capital to cater for the construction, which is the capital expenses? The operating expenses is to day-to-day activities. And then lastly, will you be able to mitigate some of the impacts on the environment? So these considerations give you an idea of what choice of technology and kind of design you need. And then that will definitely lead you into detailing or giving a detailed design requirements. Now, let's look at the key takeaways from here. The first one has got to do with sludge accumulation rate. And here we're looking at the rate at which solids build up. The other is to do with the multiplier effect. Here we're looking at the peak factor, which we use to get averages from our monthly, daily, and hourly flows to help us estimate what we expect at the fecal sludge treatment plant. The other is to do with the surface overflow rate. This is a design parameter that is important in measurement of flow rate per unit area in a settling tank. Remember, one of the effective ways of treating fecal sludge is effectively separating the liquid from the solid fraction. And so this is one of the definitions that you need to have of head. Well, that now brings us to the end of this session. Until next time, I am Isaac Akoit, and keep following these tutorials and drop your comments so that we keep learning and keep sharing. Goodbye.